Hey, it's Ike, the creator of CineMon, and I want to welcome you to the first public beta. As a quick intro, CineMon is an app that transforms your iPad or Mac into a professional cinema monitor. You're probably familiar with field monitors if you worked on a professional set or in a studio. These are generally rigged directly onto cameras and used by cinematographers, camera operators, and ACs, or set up in Video Village for directors and other crew members to see what the camera sees. If you don't already have a field monitor, but you have an iPad with a USB-C port or any modern Mac computer, you can use an inexpensive adapter to transform it into a professional, feature-rich cinema monitoring solution, which I simply call CineMon. This is the setup that I will be using for this demo. Down here I have a Fuji X-T3 camera, and I have an iPad Pro 9-inch mounted on top. I probably would have used an iPad mini, but I didn't have one on hand for this demo. I'm going to turn this around and show you the front. I'm going to be using a manual focus lens, and I'm connecting the iPad to the camera with this HDMI ribbon cable, which is attached to this Camlink 4K, which is a product from a company called Elgato. The Camlink sells for around $100, but you can buy similar things for about $30 on Amazon, and you can even buy HDMI adapters for about $10 in places that ship directly from China. If you have a camera that has SDI output ports instead of HDMI, then you can buy an equivalent SDI connector. They sell these online as well, and you can see here a few listings on Amazon. If you're going to be using CineMon on a Mac, you actually have more options. For example, this is an UltraStudio Recorder 3G from Blackmagic Design. This delivers uncompressed video to the Mac, which is of higher quality. CineMon is already full of features in this version, but it's still missing some things that I'd like to add, like video recording, additional scopes, and more signal input options. I can really use your feedback to prioritize what comes next. Okay, let's get started. We'll begin the demo by launching the app. As you can see, it starts very quickly. The camera is pointed at a very simple scene that we're going to use for demo purposes. On the left side, we're going to have a color chart that we'll use later. And then on the right side, we just have some reference objects, some vintage lenses. Move my hand here in front so you can see that it's a live image. In the center, we have the main image, of course. That is always the star of the show. We have two toolbars, one at the top and one at the bottom, that contain all the controls for the app. And they're always easy to get away from the image by double tapping. Double tapping again brings them back. As you can see, different tools are grouped in the toolbars in different ways. Down here we have the video assist tools. Up in the upper left right now we have the source panel, and we have controls for the scopes on the right. You can also swap the toolbars by tapping this button down here, and you can tap it again to swap them. I'm going to start using them this way for the demo. I'll be swapping them later. I want to point out that we're currently monitoring a 4K signal in full resolution, which you can see at the top. And we can zoom into the image by using a pinch to zoom gesture. And by tapping and dragging, we can reframe the zoomed in image. So we can get really close here and focus with this manual lens. Can be a really helpful tool for things like this. You can reposition the image by this drag motion, or you can also see on the top right, there's this little mini map that shows you with the red rectangle where we are in the image. You can also drag this little rectangle around. Sometimes it's much faster. There's also a zoom icon down here if you prefer using a slider. I want to go next to the video assist tools here at the bottom. I'm going to start from left to right. The first tool is the grid tool. To activate a tool, you just tap on its icon. This one brings up a grid overlay, in this case, a rule of thirds. Each tool has additional options that you reveal by dragging its icon up like that. You can just drag it down to slide that tray back in. This tool has 3 controls. You can control the number of vertical lines, the number of horizontal lines, and there's also this color picker that allows you to tweak the color and the opacity of the overlay itself. So you can make it more transparent or more solid or opaque. And you can, of course, change the color of the grid itself. Let's turn this tool off and I'll show you the next one. This one is a center mark. You can see there's like a little target in the middle here. We can reveal, this one has only one option, which is the color. So we're just going to pick another color. I mean, it's not the color you would use probably, but just to make it really obvious. As you probably guess, you can have more than one tool active at the same time. You can just tap another tool, and right now we have both overlays. You can also reveal the option trays for both tools, and they just stack neatly on top of each other. And of course, you can collapse the ones that you're not using. Let's turn these off and look at the third tool. This is a safe area tool. You can modify the percentage of the area that you want to cover. In this case, we'll leave it at 85% and we'll make it yellow. I'm going to turn this one off and I'm going to show you the fourth one. This one, you may have noticed that a dark bar appeared at the top and bottom of the image. There are multiple aspect ratio presets in the options bar here, and it just allows you to preview different aspect ratios for the image. We can go 16:9 or even square or vertical. You can see the bars on the sides right here are not fully opaque, so you can change how transparent they are. And of course, change the color. We'll make it some horrible purple, but just for illustration purposes. I also want to show you that the other composition tools that we've been looking at are aspect ratio aware. So let me turn those on now. And as you'll see, the rule of thirds, the safe area, are adapting dynamically to the aspect ratio that we are previewing. So you always know that a third is the third of whatever the aspect ratio is. Okay, let me turn these off. Now we'll go to the next tool. This is a very simple tool. It's a flip tool. If you tap it, it just flips the image top to bottom. This can be useful if you're mounting the camera upside down. You can also flip the image horizontally instead, if you need to film through a mirror, for example, or you can flip both and then turn them both on and off with a simple tap. The next tool is the Desqueeze tool. This is helpful when filming with an anamorphic lens that distorts the image horizontally. Right now, I don't have an anamorphic lens. So what I'm going to use to demo this better is I'm going to load a pre-recorded video that was filmed with an anamorphic lens. So I'm using this menu here to change my source. I'm going to look on my iPad's local storage, and this is a sample file that was shot with a lens that squeezes the image 2 times. So I'm going to turn the tool on, and I'm going to select the 2 times aspect ratio. As you can see, the image has been desqueezed now to its proper proportions. There are all these other presets for very common anamorphic distortions, and you can also just use this manual slider to adjust the ratio just perfectly to whatever lens you're using. Up at the top, you can see that some media transfer controls showed up. This shows up when you have recorded media playing. You can scrub through the video. All right, let's go back to our live little image here using the Camlink 4K input. You can see that we can also switch, for example, to the iPad's own camera. Right now it's not framing anything interesting, but we'll go back to Camlink. Next, let me show you the overlay tool, which allows you to overlay an image on top of the live video signal. You can also capture an image by tapping on this camera. You might notice a little thumbnail appeared down there. Now, if I turn on the tool, we're overlaying the image we just captured on top of itself. So there's nothing interesting to see here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to change something in the display. For example, I'm going to remove this lens, and now the image is different. So if I turn the tool back on, you'll see that that lens, kind of a ghost version of that lens, appears. And I can switch the opacity of the overlay. This tool can be useful when you need to match the position of a prop or an actor in the scene from another take. You can also use a wipe to show the difference of the two frames, and you can change the angle of the wipe. This can be useful instead of the opacity sometimes. It's all up to you. There's also a different mode that I want to show you here. So if the opacity is not enough, or depending on the scene and the colors in the scene, you might want to try this other option here called the difference. As you can see here, the changes from the image to the live signal are showed in a specific color that you can tweak. So I'm going to use this now, for example, to try and reposition the lens back in its place. Probably going to do a sloppy job right here, but I'm trying my best as I record this. I'm not going to get it perfect this time around, but I think you get the point. Let's jump ahead and look at the next tool. The next tool is a color key or a chroma key assist tool. So I'm going to use a recorded video for this as well, because I don't have a color background. I'm going to use this one here. And the first thing I'll do is I'll open the color picker and sample green from somewhere on the screen. And now I will turn on the tool. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that everything that was green disappeared. I can also load a background plate. And this is something that I can have prepared. Some VFX team can have some backdrop prepared for me. And this can be really useful to match lighting, light direction, contrast, etc. So, it's not a perfect professional color keyer, but it's a good tool just to preview things. Okay, we'll go back to our live image again. The next tool I want to show you is focus peaking. Most prosumer or professional cameras have a focus peaking function. This works by highlighting high pixel contrast with a color. So it basically tells you what's in focus in the image. You can see that the color chart and the lenses in the front are in focus. I'm going to start moving the focus ring of my manual lens, and I'll move the focus towards the back of the cabinet. And you should be able to see how the highlight is indicating not only what's in focus, basically where the focus plane is, but also the depth of field. This tool has options as well. One of them is this edges only mode. And what this does is it shows you only the peaking, which can be useful if certain scenes that might be too busy or the focus puller might want a scene that is very isolated like this. And we can also, of course, change the color of the peaking highlight. The next tool is the Zebras tool. In the current image, only these highlights are triggering the zebras, but we can, of course, tweak the levels, and we have two levels of zebras. We have low or shadows, and we obviously have the highlights as well. So we'll leave that one at 7%, and then we'll tweak the others, the highlights, and I don't know, set those at around 85. You can also customize the color of the zebras independently. So we're making the shadow zebras some purple and the highlight zebras red in this case. Let's turn that off now. And then let's look at the next one. This one is called the Image Adjust tool. It just allows us to tweak the image in different ways. In this case, exposure, contrast, and saturation. The exposure tool uses a photometrically correct algorithm for adjusting exposure. So to show this, I'm actually going to switch my camera, as you can see here, to a flatter image mode. This is called a log profile. If you're not familiar with this, my camera has something called f-log. You can configure your camera's input log profile in the settings sidebar, and I'll show you that later. But for now, I'm just showing you, I've already done that, and it is already configured for f-log. So when I slide this up and down now, you'll see that I can adjust the exposure in a very photometrically correct way. This can be useful in cases where you need to overexpose or underexpose the image for some reason, and you want to preview the way it looks like here, so that you have a good sense for what it's actually going to look when it's color corrected later. This one here is the contrast adjustment. It does what you probably expect it to do. It just changes the contrast of the image. And we have a saturation knob here that allows you to tweak the saturation all the way down to 0 if you want to make the image black and white. This can be useful if you're shooting for black and white, or you can combine it with the focus peaking if you want to use a black and white image for focusing. Some assistants prefer that. Right. You can see that we're still in this flat image, the log image. So we're going to use the next tool to help us visualize this better in the field. And this is called a display LUT. You can see here I have 3 LUTs already loaded, or lookup tables. You can have as many as you want. We'll leave this one on. And as we turn on the tool, you'll see how the image pops back into the correct color. This doesn't match exactly what we were looking at before, because the log profile and the LUT do not produce an image that is exactly like the other profile. But it's really helpful to have this capability in the field to preview a look. Now, as you saw before, this image, although it's looking fairly correct here, it might not be the final look that you want in a production. So you might receive a different look from a colorist, for example. They might have a particular show LUT. So in this case, I'm demoing this with something called f-log to Akasaka. I can turn that on, and now it's a different look. This might be the particular color that this show is going to have. This allows the crew to preview the image closer to what the final look will be. We'll put it back here in the normal Rec 709 look. Let's look at the next tool, which is the False Color tool. False Color is a display mode that changes the colors of the image to represent the IRE value or the luminance values instead. So there's a guide down here that shows you different colors at different IRE values. What I love about the way this tool is implemented is that you can switch the gradients or the scheme that is used for this. So if I tap on this menu right here, you can see there are multiple gradients. So this one is more of an Atomos style, and this is a Blackmagic style. And these are all configurable. So not only can you switch between them, but you can create your own. For example, these last two I created myself. And you can start creating one by basically duplicating one of the pre-built ones. And you'll see here there's a new copy of that one. And I can tap this edit button, and it reveals these gradient controls. I can tap each one of these independently, move them, and I can also change the color and the opacity of each one of these nodes. I can also delete a node by tapping the X, and I can add a node to the left or to the right of the currently selected node. It's super flexible, very easy to use, and very configurable. One of the really nice things about this tool is that once you have a gradient set up in the way you want it, not only can you save it and name it, but you can also export it and you can share it with other people. You can import gradients that were created for specific cameras or locked profiles, for example. I'm deleting this one, which I did just for the demo. But I do want to show you one that I created to work exclusively with the lock profile of this camera. So now we're back in the lock profile of the camera, and I'm going to switch to the Fujifilm F-Log gradient that I created. And as you can see, this is calibrated for this color chart. You can see that the middle gray bar is green, and the 90% white next to it is colored yellow. So it is extremely easy to nail exposure with a tool like this. And if you know your camera's lock profile, you can set this up and basically nail exposure in one go. So super powerful. I actually look forward to people sharing their own gradients with each other. The last assist tool in this group is what I call the image-based spot meter. If you turn it on, you'll see that there are a couple of probes that appear on the screen, and they're called A and B. And you can drag these probes around, and wherever you place them on the screen, they will measure the luminance of the scene at that spot. Now, this has to be coordinated with the log profile of the camera. So in this case, Fujifilm F-Log. But as you can see here, I'm showing the probe A moving around and probe B staying at the 90% white. When it's in the middle gray, you can see it says 0 EV. It is also showing this contrast ratio between them. Here I loaded a different scene that uses Arri Log C4. While you're using the spot meter tool, you can also turn on a LUT so that you can visualize the colors of the image a little better. So I'm going to turn on the LUT, which I already configured. So I'll turn these probes back on. I'm going to hide the contrast label for now. And as I place probe A back in middle gray, you can see that it's at 0 EV. This image was properly calibrated. And here's a quick example showing the contrast ratio on a Talon's face. Here we're back with a full color profile on the camera, and I want to show you something I am very excited about as well, which is the video scopes. They're located on this right side of the bar, but for this part of the demo, I'm going to swap the bars so that I have them at the bottom for now. I'll turn the first one on, and this is a histogram. You are probably familiar with a histogram. Now, all of these tools are floating scopes. These are all high-performing, real-time scopes. I can move them around by dragging, and I can resize them by pinch and zoom. So super smooth. You can double tap a scope and bring additional options. You can see here I can show just the Luma. There's an RGB Overlay mode, and the one we started with, the RGB Stacked version. There are some additional options. I can change the gradical color of the scope, make it more opaque or more transparent. I can change its color to my taste. This option here allows me to change the gain of the trace. This is helpful for parts of the image that might not be captured by the full scope. And I can also change the size with a slider and the opacity of the background itself. So I can make the scope transparent or just translucent. I can also tap this button to make it full screen. Let's bring it back. And let's put it somewhere in the screen where I can use it later. Make it opaque, make it smaller, and put it here on the left. Let's take a look at the next scope. This one is a Waveform Monitor. This Waveform Monitor can also be moved around and resized. Again, double tapping the tool shows options. In this case, I can look at a Luma waveform, a colorized Luma waveform. There's an RGB mode and a RGB Parade mode. I'll set it back to colorized Luma, and let's look at the options on this one. Of course, we can change the gradical color. We can also turn on the instant extents, which show the envelope of the signal that might be difficult to see in certain scenes. You can also change the brightness of the trace, of course. And all the other options are there as well, like we saw with the histogram. Let's put this here in the center. And let's go to the next one. This is a Vectorscope. Let's make it bigger and let's look at some of its options. I'm gonna up the brightness a little bit to see the colors in the scene. These colors are representing the colors in the color chart, of course. These are the highly saturated ones. You can see it in monochrome or in a colorized version. This one has more options here to tweak. You can turn on additional targets, a polar scale, and a 2x zoom for when you want to do calibration with a target such as this one. Now, this color chart with this color profile is obviously not calibrated. As you see, we're not hitting the targets. But I'll switch the camera to the log profile and I'll use a more calibrated LUT to show you this working in just a bit. Let's turn these off. This is the extents for the Vectorscope. Again, it shows you the full envelope of the signal. Let's move this over to the right. And as with the other tools, you can turn on the scopes simultaneously. I also just want to show you the scopes on a more traditional scene that's not so artificial, so that you can get a sense for how they display and how they react to a more natural image. Okay, let's go back to our Camlink live image here. Now here I have switched to a log profile with a LUT that has been better calibrated. As you can see here in 2x mode, the colored chips are very close to their targets. The last icon in this group shows a more technical view, which is basically a 4-up view of all the scopes. In this view, you cannot move the scopes around, but you can modify some of the settings of each one of the scopes. So you have a parade at the top that you can switch, a Vectorscope, another waveform, and down here on the bottom right, you have another histogram. Now we're going to take a look at the sidebar. The sidebar has two main tabs, the Settings tab and the Organizer tab. In the Settings tab, we can see the currently selected preset, and I'll get to that in a moment. We can also see the input signal. This is where you can change the log profile of the input signal that I was mentioning earlier. Right now, you can see that Fujifilm F-Log is selected, but there are a bunch of built-in others. You can change the video levels from data to full. This is important for some input signals. There are some other settings that have to do with optimization of the pipeline. And then at the bottom, you have a way to tweak the UI brightness. So basically the brightness of the toolbars. This can be useful if you're working in a darkened scene and you want the icons to be a little bit less bright. So let me now explain what those configuration presets are. We're going to tab over to the Organizer tab, and you'll see 3 subtabs underneath. This is a list of configuration presets on this first subtab, and a configuration preset is a way to save a combination of tool activations and tool options and name them so that you can recall them later very, very easily. Let me just show you. Right below default preset, there's Compose 2.40. As I tap that, you'll see that all of these tools down here automatically got activated, and they got configured with specific options. All of these combinations can be saved and named. You can also see that I can organize these in different ways. If I long tap on a particular preset, I'll get a menu of options. I can export a preset, I can duplicate it, I can rename it, and I can delete it. I can also long press and I can drag and drop it somewhere else in the list. I can order them in any way that I want. You can also see the name of the active preset on the lower left right here. I can switch presets from here when the sidebar is not showing. I can show my handy scopes, and I can go to my full screen waveform, for example. With a single tap and drag gesture, I can get to any preset that I want instantly. I can also cycle through all the presets by swiping left to right directly on the image. Doing it a little bit more slowly allows you to see the name of the previous and the next preset that you're going to swipe to. This is the quickest way to just go through different presets by just swiping. I use this for quickly checking different looks. So before I showed you different LUTs, for example, and I can very quickly just swipe between two of them to compare them. I'm going to open the sidebar again, but I do want to show you that some of the actions you can take there, you can also take directly from the menu here. There's a context menu that allows you to duplicate the preset and save changes, etc., directly from the toolbar. Now let me switch to the next subtab. This one is the display LUTs. You can navigate to your iPad's local storage and load a cube file for any LUT that you created or that any vendor has created. Swipe gestures also work on these lists. Right here, you can see I can rename or delete by swiping right or left. Back on this subtab, for example, the config presets, you can see there are more options if you swipe. The final tab on the organizer is for false color gradients. As we saw earlier, you can have multiple gradients, you can create new ones and customize them. You can further organize them here using swipe gestures. You can delete them. As with presets and LUTs, you can import gradients. So if you have exported one before, or if you got one from someone in the community, you can just add one to the list and use it. This is the same list that you see in the tool itself when you have it open. I'll just quickly show you how all these work together. For example, I'll duplicate one now. Right now it says copy, and I can rename it, for example. Just call it flog2. And when I'm done with it, I don't like it, or for whatever reason, I can always just delete it. One thing you may have noticed during the demo is that the preset name sometimes turns a color orange. And if you have the sidebar open, you'll also see the word edited in orange. That indicates that the preset has been changed from its saved configuration. So for example, this default preset did not have the color gradient on the false color. But if I turn it back off and I set it back to the correct one, then you'll see that the orange goes away. So now we're back to the default preset configuration. This is handy to see if you have changed anything. For example, I turn on the focus peaking. It's orange now, and I know that I changed it, so I can either save the preset changes, and now if I go back to it, now the focus peaking is on, or I can reset it back. Or if I make a change that I like and I want to keep it, then I can tap duplicate preset, and it'll create a new preset for me with a new temporary name that I can obviously change. There are a couple of more quick things that I want to show you before I wrap it up. First, I just want to show you CineMon running on a Mac. What you're seeing here is basically the exact same functionality, but just very slightly adapted to the Mac user interface. Everything that you saw works exactly the same. It has the same features. The gradients and the configurations are importable or exportable from one to another. So you can configure something on a Mac and then import it into an iPad version of CineMon. If you look in the bottom bar in the source panel, you'll see that the input signal is coming from an UltraStudio Recorder 3G, which you can do on a Mac. And this is an uncompressed image, really high quality video signal. If you have a Mac Mini lying around on set, you can hook it up to a nice OLED display and place it in Video Village for the rest of the crew, for example. As I said before, I love these scopes, and here on the Mac, I want to show them side by side next to DaVinci Resolve scopes. DaVinci Resolve is very well known in the industry for color grading and editing, and it also has some great scopes, in my opinion. So you can rewind this back and play it in slow motion later if you want, or frame by frame, and you can compare the scopes of CineMon right next to the DaVinci Resolve scopes, looking at the same exact image. I think they're really spot on. If you're still watching, I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you for participating in the beta for CineMon. I'm still taking feedback for some of the features and user interface tweaks, and I hope to have a GA version very, very soon. I very much look forward to your feedback. Take care and be well.